Morning. Right, I did indeed live to tell the tale to this audience here. We'll come to what I was doing on the top of a plane in a second, but as we're very limited for time, I will give 1 minute of this over to a very brief video that will give you almost all the information you need.
Are you looking forward to this experience?
Yes.
Would you have another tattoo?
No.
Very disorientating, I guess.
I'm never doing this again. So how did we get to that point? Right, the journey began with, I talk about lots of technology, and I talk about them for a reason. I sift the good, the bad, and the ugly, and so that for clients and for the outside world, we get to see what is actually going to sink and what's going to float. So I've been talking about VR for a long time now. Artificial intelligence demonstrated with drones on stage through to gestural and AR, and lots of stuff with cars and all of the meaningful things that connect to those and how they talk about all sorts of different networks. Now, a lot of what we do is actually hitting the ground first, but again, meaningfully. So way back in 2008, we were using lots of gestural technology with augmented reality, so that was thinking about how people were interacting and living with this technology. And then through to the first iPad app on the iPad back in 2009, before the iPad hit the streets in 2010. So we were there on day one with that technology and making sure it was relevant. Through to looking at things like the Apple Watch concept, again, way before the Apple Watch turned up, we were actually working with Apple and producing content that would decide what was the right kind of content to sit on a device such as that. And then finally with VR, we've worked with VR for a number of years, and if you can see in the corner there, I was actually having a VR lightsaber battle with myself on stage. I didn't fare well. I ended up killing myself. Again, in the virtual world, you can get away with almost anything. But Brandwidth, I'm just trying to move on here. We work with so many clients across the board, and so this kind of technology is about looking how their content will sit comfortably on whatever platform exists. And VR, we were investigating this 18 years ago. Our first piece of VR was 18 years ago. And we haven't worked on it continuously. Understandably, there's been a big gap in there where VR was not relevant, but we've moved on. And the great thing is that the devices that we work with now mean that there's an audience there at last. So that that technology is actually relevant. So, as mentioned, last year I spent 24 hours in VR. And one of the main things I wanted to do there was to fall asleep and wake up in VR, because one of the things we do with a VR headset is we put it on, we go through the ceremony essentially of getting ourselves into a virtual world. But as soon as you do that, no matter how good that experience is, no matter how believable it is, you know you are in VR. Now, if you fall asleep, then wake up in VR. Everything you see, you believe. And that was one of the greatest takeaways from that, spending that entire day in VR, was that ability to wake up in it and have full belief in what you were seeing. So 48, foolishly, as if I hadn't learned my lesson, I thought, well, let's do that again, but double, because so much has developed, and that's not just content, that's platforms and the way we experience things. So why did we do it? Well, there were a number of reasons for this. Now, one of those would be image problem, and we have a big image problem. I showed this image last year, actually, at AWE, and that was about the fact that we stick headsets on, we expect people to use them in an experiential environment and send them away looking like this. We're already addressing that. Now, this isn't a VR headset, but we think about the form factor of DAQRI and ODG for AR. That's where we need to be and beyond for VR. But a big problem there, so dear old Robert, he's there again. So we've gone through various phases with our head-worn technology. We've had our glass holes. We've had the problem of the VR Williams, where we had, this is what we're doing here is giving the wrong message to the outside world. Great when we're all talking amongst each other, but when this is unleashed on the outside world, people think this is what VR is all about, and to a certain extent, they're not wrong. Then we've got the other issues with headsets, and if this is how we're looking to the outside world, again a problem, and then dear old Robert is back again. But actually, the problem with this, the endurance idea of staying in VR for the longest time possible, we had, literally the week before we did this, we had 2 Guinness World Records broken. One was for 25 hours, and one was for 50 hours. Now, these guys were either gaming solidly or watching video. Now, to our point here, that's great for an endurance record, and I love Guinness World Records, and the whole point is to continue doing what you're doing for the longest or the furthest or the fastest. But what we wanted to do was genuinely live in VR. Now, part of the stipulation from Guinness World Records was that you had to stay awake for 50 hours or 48 hours or whatever. Now, that's not living. We don't do that in real life, so that wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted to do the falling asleep and waking up. Now, again, to the outside world, the whole point of the endurance thing, the only images they had were guys sat on sofas watching TV or people vomiting in a bucket. Not the kind of thing that we wanted to show. So myself and Sarah Jones, Sarah's great within the academic world, so we wanted to lend some credence to the research angle here and the results that we got out of it. So what did we do? So we did a whole range of experiences across the 2 days. Things from the lab, and great mixes of actually measurable response time and how we were actually achieving content within VR. Facebook Spaces was in beta the week before, so we were able to socialize that, and actually contact with the outside world was really important for us. Guided meditation was how we were taking ourselves into a sleep period and then waking ourselves back up again. Pretty gentle stuff compared to the 24 hours I'd done previously, waking up to aliens and dinosaurs and all sorts of frightening content. And then in the corner here, actually the physical activities of boxing, which was great. And quite surprising that we were so immersed. Everything was entirely believable. And the great thing again about sporting activity within VR is it's a two-way thing. You're not just punching a punch bag. That punch bag punches you back again. So that's something that's actually brilliant for training and obviously great for actual aerobic exercise. And then, the living there, so the eating, the sitting in the back of a car whilst being moved from one venue to another, actually just walking around. These were all things we were, some, tackled with through cameras, but still remaining in that world. And then, pushing the limits, essentially. So we were around a go-karting track, again using through cameras so that we could look at what content worked best for VR and AR, and how we could then take that across to our motoring clients. And then I haven't had a tattoo before, or I hadn't up to that stage, and what we wanted to do was to see how VR could effectively mitigate pain. So could I distract myself from the pain of a tattoo with a virtual environment? And yes, I did. So for 45 minutes I was there under the needle. Started off without the headset on, so there was a benchmark essentially, so I knew what the pain threshold was. So if that was my 10, by using some pretty fast and frantic arcade action within a VR environment, I was able to probably drop that to a 6 or 7 over a sustained time. And using Apple Watches throughout, we were measuring heart rates, and heart rates also dropped. So yeah, I have a lasting memento from my 48 hours in VR, which my wife wasn't entirely happy about, but unfortunately I did tell her, she wasn't listening. But it was a great way of saying that this was meaningful results to the outside world. And then genuinely pushing those limits. So you saw that image at the start there. Now what we wanted to do here was, so we thought about how do we test the effects of velocity and that full-on environment so that we could replicate that in a virtual environment later. So why not strap yourself to the top wing of a biplane and go flying around with a VR headset on? Now this would have been brilliant. Now it was for Sarah. All things were planned. All was brilliant. And then I got on the wing and had my Gear VR headset on, and as I stood there ready to head off down the airstrip, it said software update required. Now, if there's anyone in the room from Samsung, I'll have a quiet word with you to one side later. But the point here was that there was no, would you like to upgrade? It was, you will upgrade now. And of course, I'm in the middle of a field with an aeroplane ready to bump down the airstrip. And there was no connectivity. There was no option, completely bricked. I had to take the phone out and do the whole experience through the blurred lenses of my remaining piece of plastic strapped to my head. Now, if I was to take anything positive away from that, it would be that my empathy was with the very partially sighted, to the point that I didn't actually know that whether I had taken off at one point because there was so little I could actually make out of the environment around me. Now, Sarah got the results from this that we required, so we can take away from this to say, look, we can use all sorts of interesting things to make it feel as if we're moving around, as if we've got wind in our faces. That's all great, but actually some of this content is again for an AR environment where we can overlay content on the real world. And it doesn't get more real than this. So, those stats that came away from that. So the obvious 48 hours, 30 experiences, and you've seen some of the variety that we've had there, from the more mundane to the more extreme, clearly. But we moved around. So if you were to have a parallel with the experiences of the guys sat on the sofa watching TV for 50 hours, you really wouldn't have much to fill this up. But the interesting thing here, 41,381 steps. We were moving. Some of that was kind of moving around on the spot. But a lot of that was moving around so that we could experience the outside world in a virtual environment. Now you look at some of this, we actually traveled 20 miles. Now, some of that was in a vehicle en route to other experiences. Now, the only time we felt really badly motion sick was when we were in the vehicle and the rest of the virtual world was turning around us as the car was moving. So, lots of the takeaways about endurance. None of the manufacturers supported any of this. They all thought we would die or be mentally affected. They never thought that I would be standing on a stage talking about it afterwards. But not a single manufacturer would support us because they said, you're breaking the rules. Now, the rules are you can go in for, I don't know, an hour, hour and a half, then you must come back out again. Now, they don't really stipulate that after another 5 minutes you can go back in again. What we were doing was we were coming out for 5 minutes every hour. We were doing this under medical conditions. We were looking at this as genuine research that we're now able to give back to those manufacturers that didn't really want to support us in the first place. Because no one wants to talk about this. No one wants to talk about the effects. I love conferences. I love talking out there. I love VR, AR, all of this technology, and we're all very good at being very positive about everything. But no one sits anything in a corner and says, right, let's pull that back out again and talk about the things that are either negative or could be negative, or once they hit the media and the outside world will be the things that are highlighted. We need to be prepared for that. We need to have the story straight for the outside world. So they're the stats. That was the wonders of 48 hours in VR, and plenty more to answer questions beyond this. I'll be around for the full 2 days and posting much more in depth online afterwards. Thank you.